Hi, this is Steve from Conductive Labs, and in this video we're going to talk about the clock feature on the MRCC, and that would be under our Extras menu. So I have it already, you should see it up there on the screen, and let's just walk through the features of the clock, and then we'll give a little demo. So these first three tab stops are actually buttons, and if you press the black button, you'll actually send that message. And the way MIDI works, there is a stop and a start and a continue message, and that's what those buttons will just send. Those are for turning on and turning off sequences downstream. The next one, which is probably the most important one, is the clock enable. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and you'll see over here now we've got a tempo meter, so you can sort of see how fast the beats per minute are. Which brings us to our next field, is the beats per minute. So I can change that. If I turn this up really fast, you can see it goes a little faster. The range for this is 10 BPM up to 240 BPM. Sometimes you'll see I hold this blue button down. Can you see that? Yeah. I use my finger to hold the blue button down as I rotate this. So it'll go by tens instead of by ones. It goes a little bit faster. Okay, PPQ. That stands for pulses per quarter note, and that only has to do with the jack on the side of the MRCC, which is an analog pulse output. So if you wanted to clock your Euro rack and keep it in sync with everything else in your studio, you could actually send it out using clock out. And the PPQ is typically set for 1 or 2 for Euro rack based on which module you use. I think there's 1, 2, 4. Yep. And then jumps up to 24. And 24 is actually what MIDI uses. You don't have to worry about that because it's only for the jack on the side. But again, various devices will require different pulses per quarter note. And if you get it wrong, it'll just be divided. Okay, the next one is tick on stop. That means if you press that stop button up there to send a stop message, it says tick on stop yes, which means it'll always send tick messages, and that's the way I kind of prefer it. In the MIDI protocol, there's a tick message. It just goes tick, tick, tick 24 times per quarter note, and I want that running all the time. The reason why is if you have like an outboard gear that, like, let's say an effect like a digital delay or any kind of delay, and it is based on your clock, and you stop the clock so that the sequence stops, and it stops the clock pulses, that means that that device downstream, the digital delay, will stop receiving clock and not know what tempo to be at. Now, a lot of the modern devices have a setting called auto, and what that does is if it stops sensing clock, it'll set the internal clock to the last external clock coming in, so it keeps you safe. But anyway, I still like sending clock all the time. However, on most Arturia and maybe some others controllers, when you hit the stop button, it stops sending clock. So in order to mimic that mode, you can change this to no, and then it will stop sending clock when you hit the stop button. Anyway, that's kind of long-winded, but it needed some description because it's an important thing to understand. The last one down here is perhaps an obscure setting. If you leave it at yes, that means that that's the normal setting, and you probably always want to leave it that way. That means that if you port filter the stop, start, continue messages, and we talked about that in a previous video, then the internal MRCC messages will be port filtered, just as if they were coming in from an external port. If you turn that to no, then it ignores that setting and sends it out. So just probably leave it at yes, but I wanted to give users that extra functionality just in case they needed it for some odd reason. Okay, so that's all the settings for that menu. Let's now actually use it. So I am going to start sending clock to the key step. Now notice I've got this cable plugged into an output port. It's got this orange connector. It goes up, bang, and it goes into the input port of the key step. I also have the switches on the back of the key step set to external clock. So now by pushing this button when I'm on the clock menu, it'll turn that red. And what it's doing now is telling me that it is sending clock to the key step. So that's great. Now let's jump out and have a look at the routing. Okay, so I've got 2, which is coming from the key step, this black MIDI cable, going out to 3, which is going to my Volca FM. So I'm just normally playing it. Now notice that on this routing here, there's a red arrow. That's telling me that clock is coming in on port 2, this one, which means the key step is sending clock. So it must be sending the clock back out the port from when it gets it on the inbound. So, so it's coming in the orange port and it's looping it back out the black port. So let's go ahead and filter that, because I don't want any extra clocks coming out of this device, because sometimes you get these weird clock loops. So I'll go down to filter here and just boop, hit the clock and it will filter that. And while we're at it, I will also filter these stop, start, continue messages. So now I will get no clock information, what they call real-time messages coming out of the key step. So I can still play, no problem. If I hit this button, and that's going to start the arpeggio, and I hold these down. So now the arpeggio is coming out and being sent to the FM. If I use the rate knob here, it does nothing because it's using an external clock. So let's go back to the clock page now. And if I hit enable no, then it stops the key step because no clock is coming in. It's just like in suspended animation. If I hit it yes, it keeps going. And then of course we can change the speed and decrease the speed. Yeah. So that's basically how clock works on the MRCC. You can use it as your master clock in your studio and not worry about if you hit stop or start on some device that the clock pulses will stop and start, especially if you've got multiple sequences going on. And if you do have multiple sequences going on, it's always good to have a master clock so all your sequences are using the same clock. Okay, so thanks so much for watching this video, and hope you learned something. I certainly did by teaching it. Talk to you later.